So our next talk is going to be by Sid Kalla. He's going to be discussing community capital in a digital world with NFTs, DAOs, and social tokens. So give it up for Sid Kalla.
All right. Yeah, thanks everyone for being here on a rainy day. All right, perfect. Yeah, so my name is Sid Kalla. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Roll. And today I want to talk to you about community capital in our Web3 first world. So in the next 10 minutes, I essentially want to present to you the case for why community capital really is the most exciting phase of crypto for the next 10 years. And I believe that all these trends that you're seeing right now, from your fungible tokens, non-fungible tokens, DeFi primitives, they all kind of come together into this one giant way. And the other thing I want to quickly touch upon is also why we believe strongly that this is the way to mass adoption of crypto. Oh, perfect. Yeah, so let's rewind the clock, say 20 years or so, towards the beginning of online social, so say early 2000s or so. What did the world look like back then? You would exchange text messages, tweets, kind of started with the text, moved on to images, went on to videos now. And through all these things, the one trend that has defined the first 2 decades of online social is pretty much what you can consider as user-generated capital. Basically, the platforms don't generate their own capital. This is what the users are creating, right? And well, who has the power in this world? It's always the platforms. The users are pretty much at the mercy of the platforms. If you look at the cumulative market cap of social media companies today, it's close to $1 trillion. And the users are, if you hadn't noticed, are not nearly making as much. But that part is changing. So with the power of crypto, kind of the Web3 or blockchain technology, you're essentially entering a world where we're moving away from content being the center of everything towards ownership really defining what this new social world would look like. So in the traditional Web 2, you have this vague sense of yeah, there's something called social capital. I'm an Instagram influencer, I have certain clout online, but it's never tangible, and it's never interoperable with other platforms. So if you've been at Instagram for very long and now you want to come to this new platform called TikTok, there's no porting your social capital over, right? It's not something you truly own, it's what the platforms own. With Web3, that changes. Once you kind of go into these tokenized worlds, you go on the blockchain, you can truly own that value that you're creating as opposed to the platforms. And this also becomes important when you're thinking about the next 2 decades of social, because there are probably the biggest social platform on the planet is not even invented yet. You still have a large percentage of the globe who are not online. So we want to build a world towards which it interoperates with the platforms of the future as well. Yeah, so crypto is really leading this shift. You can think of that from user-generated content to user-generated capital. In this world, again, what's at the center is around ownership, not just monetization in the traditional way, right? Where I'm tipping my favorite creators $5. So instead of content, it becomes kind of more ownership, right? And in addition to that, it's about interoperability. So your social capital should interoperate with the platforms of today, but also tomorrow. And just to reiterate this point, it's a fundamentally new addition to the internet. There is no equivalent, there's no Web 2 equivalent of this. It does not, if you subscribe to someone on Patreon or YouTube or OnlyFans, it's not the same thing. There is no concept of ownership. So something that truly is what crypto and Web 3 can really enable. The whole aspect of how we get there and where we are today is a journey that is already taking place right now, and that's kind of the reason why all of you are here today in the first place. So you have NFTs very broadly as capital assets of this new economy. So think of the metaverse land or art that you can own. Those are all represented as NFTs. DAOs kind of take on the role of governance. Social tokens are kind of liquid assets and things that kind of function as money inside a closed ecosystem of the community that you're building. But in this new world, if you really think of community itself as being a capital asset, that world is really represented by social tokens. So what that really lets you do is to own a piece of the community that you're part of. So if you guys are all part of like 30 different communities, you can own a piece of all those 30 communities. Again, like no equivalent of this in the traditional world. But the way the economics of this usually works is you have a scarce number of tokens. And this is really important because we've seen some, let's say, like not optimal decisions by DAOs where you can have an infinite number of tokens that can be minted, but then there's no certainty as to your ownership over a community. Whereas the traditional model that we have seen kind of take off in the last couple of years or so is like you have, let's say, like 10 million tokens that are minted. What that means is, let's say I were to own 10,000 tokens of that community, then I would own 0.1% of that community in perpetuity. And that's a very powerful primitive. It means that I benefit from helping the community really like grow and succeed, as opposed to that value just flowing to, let's say, like a creator or like a couple of people who are like doing that, right? So essentially, once you have the value, then again, like they're interoperable with like Web 2, Web 3 protocols. You can plug them into DeFi, buying NFTs, and so on. The way these are blending together right now is, imagine you have a DAO treasury. Think of this as like a Gnosis multisig, and you want the community to have control over how that money is spent. What does this treasury have? It has capital assets today. So that's your NFTs. Think of NFT art. Think of, again, like your land in the metaverse and so on. And that's the value that already exists inside that treasury right now. And then you also have this community as a capital, kind of represented as social tokens, but that also double as your token for the DAO, right? So again, like as a DAO, you're collectively owning the value that the community brings. And now you have a way to use that treasury and like make decisions collectively. So imagine like this event was a DAO, right? Like, what would that look like? You'll issue a token first. So let's say you have 10 million NFT.NYC tokens, and you would do some retroactive distribution to all the people who are present here today and 3+ years, I believe, in the past. Your speakers, sponsors, everyone else who's here kind of becomes part of that community. And then the event brings in some revenue that can be in the form of your ETH or USDC. It could be in the form of NFTs from all the people who are like coming here. And then the governance aspect takes over. The governance aspect could be as simple as like, hey, how do we, let's say like we accept sponsors, right? Like which sponsors like really speak to the ethos of the community, or it can be big decisions, like let's say which city should we expand to next after New York. So it can be wider than that. So that's pretty much like high level on like governance of the treasury. What that evolves into in the future is like, imagine the millions of communities that you have today, like all of them being tokenized in their own way. And now instead of being a passive, let's say like a donator or like a recipient in the community, you are like actively contributing. But most importantly, like you would benefit from the community becoming more valuable over time, something with no analog in kind of like the today's world. So mostly like when you think of monetization today, in the Web 2 world, you talk about transactions. So this is like your Patreon model or like OnlyFans or any like donation-based models. The reason that kind of Web 3 kind of moves towards an ownership model. So like when you talk of monetization in Web 3, you move instantly from a transactional-based relationship to like an ownership-based relationship. And again, like that's a very powerful primitive. We are just seeing the very early stages of this, but I think that's going to become a big part of the Web3 story going forward. And then that brings us to mass adoption. And the thesis here is very simple. People today, like literally billions of people today, are already part of communities online. You don't have to build new infrastructure. You don't need to kind of like get them into an ecosystem. They already are part of that ecosystem. It's literally what the internet has done for us, in the last 20, 30 years. So imagine like having the ability to tokenize these communities, making community itself as an asset class, and then collectively governing the decisions of that community as it evolves. So that's kind of like what we believe really brings mass adoption, because those communities already exist. Like all we need to do is kind of just breathe financial life, like that economics into these communities. From a creator economy perspective, this is also interesting because that fans can then really be a part of the creator's journey online. And I don't have enough time to dive more deeper into some thoughts on the creator economy. But I'm going to wrap this up soon. I know there's not much time for questions, but I would generally love to hear all of your thoughts on just like on this evolution. And yeah, you can reach me on Twitter or email. That's usually the best way. Yeah, thank you all very much.